what's going on, guys? It is Foxy90 here, and welcome back to a brand new video for you guys today here on the channel, and a different type of F1 debate video for your faces today. Basically, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be ranking the drivers from 2024 based on this tier list. So, we have got them at what they'll be as their top tier, if they've had a top tier season so far, a great season so far, mid-season so far, bad season so far, and an awful season so far. If you guys end up enjoying today's video, feel free to drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you're new around here as well, if you do enjoy the content you see, and let me know what you think in the comment section down below as we reach the mid-season summer break for Formula One. So basically, let's see what has been the my personal thoughts on basically these drivers and how they've been. So we're going to go pretty much basically in order of how they are on the track here. So Daniel Ricciardo, we're going to kick things off with him with, it's either been a bad season or it's been a mid-season. He's been outperformed by Yuki Tsunoda quite a lot, especially, so the first couple of races I'd say bad, but he's been out-qualified by Yuki Tsunoda quite a bit. You know, the first race of the season, Tsunoda was a little bit hot-headed, but then he was beating Ricciardo. But in these last few races, especially from Canada onwards, Ricciardo has been all right, but ultimately he's been out-qualified more than Tsunoda. He scored less points as Tsunoda, and he scored less, the head-to-head in qualifying is also worse. I don't think it's been a good season for Ricciardo, I'll be honest. He hasn't really had many standout drives. A couple of bad strategies as well from RB, don't get me wrong, like Spa and Hungary, I think, was also a bad one from them. So it's not been a great season for Ricciardo, so I'm going to have to put it in bad. I don't think it's been... It's very close between mid and bad, but I think I'd go with bad. To be honest, I don't really... He's had one standout for me, and that was probably Canada's race was very good from him, and Miami sprint. Apart from that, he's not really done anything. Fernando Alonso, I'm going to put in a mid-season. He's had, especially the first few races when the Aston Martin was actually good, Alonso was, I say good, was decent. Alonso was pretty much there. He had good pace in the early races in China, in Japan, and races like that. He was able to stay in front, fighting some of the McLarens here and there. He was able to stay in front of both the Mercedes drivers. But obviously, as the upgrades have come in and they've not worked and the cars got progressively worse, it's just killed off all of Alonso's morale. I mean, last season he was able to have very good morale, especially when upgrades initially were working for Aston. But obviously this season he's come in thinking that they've rectified everything, had a decent start, and then it's just all gone to pot. So I think it's kind of hurt him a lot. So while it had initially been a great season to start with, considering where the car was, he's now had quite a lot of bad races, so I can only put it in mid. That's kind of where I'm at with it. Max Verstappen, you're going to have to put him in top tier. Ultimately, he's the Drivers' Championship leader. The car is not performing well at the moment, but ultimately he has still, whilst he had his little shouty outrage at the Hungarian Grand Prix, let's not forget that he's still been putting in results and performances that warrant where he is. Obviously, he's won 7 Grand Prix this season. Him and Lewis Hamilton are the only 2 drivers to have achieved multiple race victories in a season. So, ultimately we're into round 14 of the season. We've had 14 races. We've got 10 to go, and Verstappen has won half of them. So, while the pack has now closed up, and I don't expect Verstappen to be winning as many races in the second half of the season, maybe if Red Bull get a big upgrade package in and it works for them, then it could be the case. But ultimately, let's not forget how good Max has been throughout the course of this season, especially in the first part of the season when the car was just levels clear of everybody else. But even when the competition's been tough, I go back to the British Grand Prix, Verstappen had no right to be challenging for victory, and he came within 2 or 3 laps of doing so. He shouldn't have beaten Lando Norris in Belgium, but he did and had a decent race there. Hungary, it just didn't work out for him. It's one of those, you have a bad race in Formula One. It happens. You can't always be perfect. He obviously strives to be, but you can't always be like that. And like you say, the car has been very good. It's now being caught up. It's just what it is. But ultimately, when you're a championship leader by 78 points, you can't not be having a top tier season, and he will go on to win his 4th championship. Next up is Lewis Hamilton. Now, this is an interesting one for Hamilton. If July never existed, I'd be putting Hamilton in a mid to bad season. of Formula One. But he's actually having it's turning out to be a very good season for Lewis Hamilton. You know, the start of the year was really bad. Like, he literally was he couldn't qualify above P7. He couldn't finish in the points like above P6 or whatever. But from Miami onwards, since these upgrades have been rolling in, he has genuinely found some form. You know, in Canada again, he was only 2/10 behind Russell for pole, but finished in P7. That's just how close qualifying was. But now he's really picking up a streak. He's really picking up his form. And I genuinely do believe that the British Grand Prix race victory has transformed Lewis Hamilton and just set off so much weight off of his shoulders. At the Hungarian Grand Prix, we saw it again. Okay, Russell had a bad qualifying. You know, that's fair enough. But he came into that race and he decided, you know, and he fought Verstappen super hard, super aggressively, super fairly. Kind of. There was, you know, the collision was a bit of a racing incident on that one. And then come the Belgian Grand Prix, that was peak prime Lewis Hamilton. That was perfect. He muscled his way into P2, blitzed his way into P1, and all right, Russell made the better strategy call on the day, albeit with an underweight car at the end of it. But Lewis controlled the race perfectly. Didn't allow Leclerc to catch him, managed the gap, managed things, and that was a type of classic Hamilton race. But obviously, it's not been a top-tier season because the first half of the year has been poor. You know, he's been knocked out a couple of times in the early phases of qualifying. Like I said, he was poor in his qualifying, poor in some of his races, constantly getting beaten by Russell. But now with the car working, now with the car being one of the fastest in the field, he's definitely found his form. So I put him in great season. Same too with Oscar Piastri. He's had a great season for me. He's been very, very competitive. Decent in terms of his points, his tallies towards himself and Lando Norris. Of course, the two of them are separated by only 32 points, which is a decent amount, but, you know, we are 14 races in. Of course, Lando has been stealing the headlines. He's been a lot quicker, I'd say, than Oscar, but ultimately Oscar's had a very cool and calm and collected head. And obviously, I think it's in the last 3 or 4 races. I can't remember how many races it was. I think it's the last 3 or 4 races. Both Oscar Piastri and Lewis Hamilton have scored 80 points between them, and they've outscored Red Bull and Ferrari as constructors. Not together, but like the two constructors. But he's just had a great season, and there's nothing to say about it. He's made some brilliant overtakes. His win in Hungary was top quality. He deserved that win. He was quicker in Silverstone and probably should have got the win had McLaren not screwed him over multiple times. And he was amazing in Spa as well, and took the fight to the Mercedes in the end. Ultimately, it didn't work out. I don't think it would have either way, but that's where we kind of see it. It's been a great season for Piastri, so that's where I think of it. This is a tough one, actually. Carlos Sainz now. He had a brilliant start to the season. And has he been mid, though? Do I really think that Sainz has had a mid-season, considering a mid-season, considering where he's been at? You know, he's had great races, but he's also fallen off a little bit in terms of pace. But then the Ferrari car has fallen. No, I'm going to give him a great season. I'm going to give it to him. I think the first part of this year, he was levels clear of Charles Leclerc. He was much the quicker Ferrari driver. In Bahrain, I don't think he was as fast. I'm pretty sure Leclerc beat him anyway. No, Sainz did beat him because he overtook him like twice. Obviously, he got his win in Australia, and that was a race where it was all open because Verstappen DNF in the Grand Prix and Sainz won it. Sainz got a couple of podiums. He beat Leclerc, I remember, in Japan and so forth. Leclerc is definitely overtaken in terms of the reins of where they are as competitive level. But there's no doubt that Sainz has definitely had a great season. It is starting to tail off, and maybe when I do this again at the end of the season, Sainz will end up having just an overall mid-season. But ultimately, you're a Grand Prix winner. You've scored multiple podiums. You've had a decent go at it. And like I said, there was a point where we were all talking about whether it was wrong to drop Carlos Sainz for Lewis Hamilton versus Charles Leclerc because of the competitiveness of the two drivers. So I'm going to give him a great season. And that's leading me to Norris. I genuinely, this is going to sound mind-blowing and biblical and stupid, but I'm genuinely doing this. I'm putting Norris in a mid-season. I'm doing it. I'm putting Norris in mid right now. Like, the man that's second in the Drivers' Championship, the man that's the closest to challenging Verstappen, I'm sorry, I can't put him as having a great season. I just can't. The car is... Let's get round to it. The McLaren was the third fastest car for the first portion of the season, up until the Miami Grand Prix. From the Miami Grand Prix onwards, the McLaren has been level, if not the fastest car on the grid. The problem is, Miami was Lando Norris's weight off of his shoulders, just like Lewis Hamilton. That's when Norris, I feel, should have been rejuvenated, should have had that weight off his shoulders, that he can win a Grand Prix, that he can get pole positions because he's already done so, and that the sky's the limit now. The problem is that Norris has made so many mistakes from this point onwards that it's becoming very, very alarming for the team. He should have won in Imola, but obviously Verstappen managed to hold off. But again, that was, I suppose, more down to the toe. I've already discussed this before, but he should have won possibly in Imola. In Canada, he should have won. In Spain, he got a terrible start off the line and then lost out from there. In Hungary, he got a terrible start off the line, lost out there. In Spa, he got a terrible start off the line and lost out there. Then locked up trying to overtake Sainz. Then locked up trying to overtake Verstappen. And in Silverstone, he should have won there. But again, he couldn't get the strategy correctly. And he was too busy thinking about what other teams were doing. And overall, it's just not been good. You know, for a car that's... For a driver of his caliber in a car that what he's now been given... He's not maximised it. So I can't really give Lando Norris any more than the mid-season. I'm sorry. It's just, personally, what I kind of think. Moving things on then to Kevin Magnussen. It's been an awful season for K-Mag. He's obviously not going to be driving for Haas next year. I don't think he'll be in Formula 1 at all next year. And he's obviously very close to a race ban for his penalties that he's had and his points licence. It's just been awful. Hulkenberg's been much quicker than Magnussen. He's been a better driver. He's been more successful in getting the points for the Haas F1 team. Magnussen's just been getting too many penalties, too many issues with drivers, too many bad driving scenarios on the circuit, having to race badly so you can give Hulkenberg a chance. And so it's just been bad. And he's not really found his form since 2022. Obviously, he came into 22, was rejuvenated, was refreshed, felt like he had been a new man after initially losing his drive. It's not really gone anywhere for him, so it's got to be an awful season, unfortunately, for Kevin Magnussen. It's a shame, but it is what it is. Next up for Albon, I think it's just been a mid-season. I don't think it's been a bad season from Albon, but I don't think it's been a good season for Albon. Obviously, the Williams has taken on a completely new sort of trajectory in terms of a development path. Obviously, it's not the straight line speed king that it used to be. They've tried to make it more well-rounded, but obviously they've had to take multiple step backs to take steps forwards. But ultimately, Alex has still crucially got the points for Williams on the board, which is keeping them off the bottom of the Constructors' Championship. So that's important. It's every point matters down that area of the grid. And he's had some very strong and solid races. And let's not be frank, you know, the fact that we've got these type of these drivers scoring these points, everything is critical when you've got 4 teams that are so much clear of everybody else. That's a total, well, you could do the maths there, 8 cars that could potentially score points. You know, we saw, all right, before Russell's disqualification in the last race in Spa, all of those 8 drivers getting points. Now, obviously, Albon didn't score a point that weekend, but it shows then there's only 2 other points playing positions for the rest of the midfield pack up for grabs. So, crucial that he's getting the points on the board, and I'm sure he'll have more point scoring finishes in the future. It's just been a decent mid-season for Albon so far, anyway. Sergio Perez, he has had a bad season. I would, and this is very generous, I would put him as having an awful season, but ultimately at the start of the year, when the Red Bull was, alright, levels clear of everybody else, Perez was there and was able to get those 1-2 finishes for the team. You know, and there was times when he was behind specific cars like Charles Leclerc, for example, in the Ferrari, I think in the first 2 races, where Perez had the pace, had the ability to blitz past them. Even in Bahrain, I think he was behind Russell, behind Leclerc, behind a few cars and was able to get on through. And he was just overall being a proper number 2 driver, being there when Verstappen is winning all the races. Obviously in Australia, it didn't work out when Verstappen wasn't there. That's where Perez should have won, really. And there was obviously the debate, well, could Perez potentially challenge for the championship? Guess what we did in 2023 when Perez won 2 races? Ask if he could challenge to fight for the World Championship. and now we can see what happens. But ultimately, it's just curtailed into a horrific season as time has gone on. I could put it in awful. I could. I'm being a bit generous, probably putting it in a bad season. But ultimately, he had been able to do what Red Bull needed him to do when the car was at its ultimate fastest. But now with everybody closing up, it's obviously just been really, really poor from Perez. And unfortunately, that's where the things lie. I might as well do the next two together. Guan Yu Zhou and Logan Sargent. Effectively, they have been shit. There's no other word to say. They've been terrible. Guan Yu Zhou has been outclassed by Bottas. He's been outqualified by Bottas on basically probably an average of like half a second. He's just been terrible. And yeah, it's been an awful season for Guan Yu Zhou. Same thing with Logan Sargent. Sargent's done nothing impressive. He's a waste of time in Formula 1. I respect Williams for waiting for Logan Sargent to come into Formula 1 through the academy. They were loyal to that, and I respect that. I also respect that they gave Logan a second opportunity to prove his worth, because obviously in his rookie season, it was a rubbish season anyway. But they, I suppose, gave a bit more respect because he'd come through the ranks and allowed him to have a season to basically bed himself into the sport. And obviously he's had this season now where realistically he should be challenging, if not closer, to Albon, and he's just not. And he's obviously not got a drive for next year, and he's probably going to go to IndyCar. It hasn't worked out for Logan in Formula 1, and he's just been, well, terrible, really. So that's all you can say. It's been a bad season for Valtteri Bottas. I wanted to put Bottas in mid, because there had been a couple of occasions at the start of the year where Bottas probably could have scored points had it not been for Sauber's horrific pit crew and their horrific wheel guns that just don't work. But ultimately, I can't really put a driver in mid for not scoring a point. I could, to an extent, but it's just been a bad season. He's obviously had some issues of his own. He definitely deserves a drive for next year. It looks like it's not going to happen, but I feel like Bottas really has just been underwhelmed by the fact that the team has let him down significantly, and I think if the Sauber crew had decent pit stops from the get-go, I think he would have had quite a few points on the board, and maybe that would have changed our perspective of Valtteri Bottas, but ultimately it hasn't, and that's kind of where we lie in all of that. So that's where I kind of put Valtteri Bottas. In the midst of it, next is Lance Stroll, bad season. Now, I will say this for Lance Stroll. He has improved in terms of his performance throughout the course of Aston Martin getting worse. That's the problem. When the Aston Martin was a genuinely faster car, and it was, fourth, fifth best, maybe between third and the fifth fastest car on a given race weekend for the first 4 or 5 races, the Aston Martin was only being carried by Alonso. Stroll wasn't in the competition. He wasn't in the battle. He wasn't there. And it was the same thing in 2023. The problem is, when the car is good, Stroll's useless. When the car is useless, Stroll's decent. That's the wrong way round. I mean, you need to be good in every area of the range. And whilst, don't get me wrong, he's having some good performances and he's been out-qualifying and outperforming Fernando Alonso, I think more so, you have to kind of say to Alonso, well, you know what Alonso's like. The car was slightly good, and now it's rubbish, and it's nowhere near the competition. Ultimately, I'm not a massive fan of Fernando Alonso, but the reason why he was there was speculation that he could go to Mercedes, and Alonso was literally there going, why would I go to Mercedes when Aston Martin's quicker? There's no point. That's a bit of a funny joke there. Haha, great joke. And now Alonso is getting lapped every single race weekend by the Mercedes. The Mercedes have got the second most amount of race victories as a constructor this year behind Red Bull. Red Bull with 7, Mercedes with 3, Ferrari and McLaren with 2. So it makes Alonso look stupid. I don't think Alonso's even had a podium this year. And yet Mercedes are on a run of 6 in a row. So you can see why Alonso would be can't be bothered because, the car's just not performing. So yeah, Stroll, I say, he's not been too bad the last few races, and he's been slowly going under the radar. But ultimately, you can't take away from the fact that when Aston Martin needed him more, he's not performed. And that's where it has. The two Alpines, they're both... This is a hard one. The two Alpine drivers, they're both probably mid to bad. I mean, they've had flashes of highlights. They've also had flashes of lowlights. But ultimately, I think what we can say is I'm going to put them both in mid because the Alpine has been an awful car throughout the start of the year. But ultimately, I don't really remember if the Alpines have had massive issues where they've crashed into. Well, I mean, they had the issues in Austria a little bit, but I think they've both had their opportunities to show a bit of shock speed, if that makes sense. You know, the Alpine is not a good car, but they've been able to make use of it. And I think that's kind of good for them. I think they've been decent when the car has allowed it to be decent and get some points. They've been able to score some key points. They've each had their own form of success. It was Ocon that was getting the happy celebrations first, getting into Q2, Q3, etc. Then it was Gasly getting that. Oh wait, hang on. I've just realised that they crashed in Monaco, didn't they? And Ocon retired from the Grand Prix. I completely forgot about that. Does that change anything for me? Okay, it actually does, because I forgot about that. Gasly's had a mid-season, Ocon's had a bad one, you know, because Ocon's had a lot more problems coming his way. And ultimately, Ocon is literally the most unsportsmanlike teammate of all time. So that's probably where we're at. So yeah, Ocon, sorry, you've been bad. Gasly's not been amazing, but ultimately, I forgot that Ocon ran into him. So that's a rip on that one. Next is George Russell. He's had a great season. He's obviously been out-qualifying Lewis Hamilton on a regular basis. He's obviously out-qualified him more. He nearly had more race victories than Lewis Hamilton this season. He was super unlucky at the British Grand Prix with the retirement. He did obviously have that silly crash at the Australian Grand Prix. Why Alonso got penalised for that, I mean, telemetry showed that he brake tested, in fairness, and it would have caught Russell out in some respects, but it was quite a harsh of a penalty. But ultimately, he crashed in Australia. And he's been able to just keep up great form. He's been there. He's been leading races. He's won the race in Austria. He put in, again, I know the car was illegal at the end of it, but he put in one of his greatest race performances ever with that win at Belgium that was taken away from him. So ultimately, you can't deny that Russell has had a very good season, and he's putting him in again for the third year in a row. He's going up against one of the greatest Formula 1 drivers of all time, and he's holding his own. And he's putting himself a good case to be a team leader for Mercedes going into next year. Yuki Tsunoda, it's going to have to be a bad season for Tsunoda. It started well with obviously I'll put him in front of Ricciardo because it makes it look like it's been like that. He started very well, and do you know what, maybe mid actually. He started the season really, really well, and he was very much putting in some super mature performances. All right, Bahrain was an anomaly because he was a knob in that race. But from then on in, he was out-qualifying Ricciardo, and it was like Ricciardo was trying to find out what was wrong, and he even needed a new chassis to try and fix his own problems. And Tsunoda was just doing a good job at that point. But Ricciardo's sort of come back into his own a little bit, and Tsunoda's just slowly, very slowly dropping off the ball a little bit. But ultimately, has he had a better season than Ricciardo? Yes, because he's out-qualified him more often. He's beaten him in more races, and he's got more points. So you have to give Tsunoda the benefit of the doubt. Hülkenberg, great season. Great season from Nico Hülkenberg. He's been really, really good this year. His qualifying has been immense. He's had some great race performances. His highlights was obviously his back-to-back P6 in Austria and in Silverstone. And he's had a very, very good run of form and thoroughly deserves his new contract with Audi. And I wish him all the best. Yeah, it's been a great season for him. It's also actually been a great season for Leclerc. We might as well put that in there as well. It's been great from Hülkenberg. He's been very, very good, very, very competitive, and he deserves to have a great season. And so far, Leclerc's also had a great season. Again, the Ferrari car has definitely been struggling as of late. He obviously had that mistake in Austria in qualifying, and he obviously got pinched and just ruined his entire race there. And he has had some other bad races, but they've been strategy orientated. Obviously in Hungary, where was it? Canada, that was strategy orientated, going on to the dry tyres when it really wasn't working, but the Ferrari was just rubbish around Canada in general. Then going into Silverstone, again, Ferrari called to box, and it wasn't the right decision. But ultimately, the talent that Leclerc has, obviously, in Monaco, he put in an absolutely A-list performance and really got himself back into the swing of it after Sainz had basically started the season better than him. And then also, you have to look at Leclerc in Spa, because that was a Charles Leclerc that you kind of remember, you know? He obviously put in a great lap in the wet to go onto the front row and take pole courtesy of Verstappen's penalty. Okay, he didn't have the pace to fight Lewis Hamilton, but he was able to hold off Perez. He then held off Piastri for as long as he could, and then obviously Piastri overtook him, and then he fended off Verstappen and Lando Norris to take home a podium after George Russell was disqualified. And you can't deny that that's a classic Charles Leclerc type performance, overachieving in a car that didn't deserve to be where it was. And he's just had a great season overall. But there then is my list. That is what I personally think of this F1 2024 season so far. Review of the drivers. I believe this is how it should be. Obviously, with Verstappen at the top, with Piastri, Hamilton, Sainz, Russell, Hülkenberg, and Leclerc all having great seasons. I believe that Norris, Alonso, Albon, Gasly, and Tsunoda have had mid-seasons. It's been a bad season so far for Ocon, Ricciardo, Perez, Bottas, and Stroll. And it's been an awful season for Magnussen, Zhou, and Logan Sargent. First of all, if you guys have enjoyed the video, drop it a like, subscribe if you're new around here, if you do enjoy the content you do see. Let me know what you think of my tier list in the comment section down below. Would you make any changes to that? And of course, I will be going ahead and reviewing this tier list and comparing it to one that I'll do at the end of the season. But for now, guys, I'm out of here. Thank you very much for watching. Take care all. Peace.